A guy shows up with flowers, and somehow, it doesn't feel as special as it used to. Those good morning texts. Same tone, same rhythm, like they were copied from somewhere else. Even the passionate promises that once felt magical now fade quicker than perfume on a crowded street. At some point, we start sensing that affection is easy to imitate. But presence, that's rarer than we thought. Someone who looks into you instead of just at you, who listens without rushing to respond, who notices the layers beneath your words. It feels different, almost uncanny, like they are hearing something you didn't actually say. And here's where things get interesting. Spiritually awake people love in a way that's not flashy on the outside, yet strangely unforgettable on the inside. It's subtle, quiet, almost unsettling, because it doesn't follow the script we grew up watching. Carl Jung might say it has something to do with the unconscious mind, shadow work, or the strange way two souls can recognize each other long before they understand why. They don't chase the comfort of being completed. They carry a sense of fullness and invite others into it, gently. Maybe you've felt it before. An unusual calm when someone enters the room. A moment when time seems to slow down. A presence that feels familiar, even if you just met. Not intense like fireworks, but quiet like a doorway opening somewhere inside you. It's the kind of connection that makes you wonder, why does this feel different? You can't explain it, but your inner voice knows something is happening. Something beneath the persona. Something speaking in symbols and dreams rather than words. Most people miss it. They are too busy looking for roses, grand gestures, or clever lines. But spiritually awake people, they are tuned to something deeper, a kind of consciousness that moves beneath the surface. The meaning of life doesn't shout with them. It whispers. And maybe, if you've ever felt this strange pull toward someone, not because of what they said or did, but because of who they were when they were silent, you're about to understand why. Spiritually awake people understand that love begins long before two souls intertwine. It starts within, in the quiet rooms of the unconscious mind, where the individuation process slowly reveals who they truly are. Carl Jung would say that when someone learns to face both light and darkness without fear, self-love becomes far more than a trend. It becomes a sacred foundation. Shadow work stops looking like a chore and becomes a gentle return to the parts of themselves they once abandoned. This self-awareness creates a kind of calmness, like inner alchemy turning old wounds into presence. And yes, that's where real love is born, inside, not outside. There was a time when many believed another person would complete them. Now, spiritually awake people laugh at this old belief because they've learned wholeness is an inside job. They explore their own needs and wounds before entering any bond, honoring the emotional awareness that rises like photographs from the unconscious mind. They know that if they don't embrace their own shadow first, relationships easily become unconscious agreements to soothe wounds instead of sharing life. These individuals listen to the inner voice of the self, holding their inner child with tenderness, and everything begins to shift when they simply stop running from themselves. As they dive into Jungian psychology, something becomes clear. Love rooted in lack feels like grasping at smoke. Without self-awareness, relationships turn into mirrors reflecting the unhealed. Many remember relationships where they hoped another person's love would fix the brokenness inside, only to discover they were asking someone else to do the work they hadn't done. So they began journaling, paying attention to Jungian dream symbols, decoding the collective unconscious, and studying depth psychology the way others map stars, searching for the meaning of life through symbols and meaning. Slowly, peace comes from moving inward rather than faster. Over time, spiritually awake people notice something quietly revolutionary. They don't enter relationships to fill emptiness. They come to share fullness. They understand how projection and perception shape the shadow in relationships, so they take time before merging their lives and hearts. They trust synchronicity explained by the unconscious mind, noticing messages arriving as songs, signs, or repeated symbols. When loneliness surfaces, they don't rush to fix it. They sit with it, trusting it is not a curse but a compass. In this stillness, the power of the mind transforms emotional pain into clarity, almost like emotional alchemy. Eventually, self-love becomes the way they protect their energy, not from fear, but from dilution. Love, once frantic, becomes spacious. These individuals recognize the wounded healer archetype within themselves, not as a burden but as a sign that every scar can guide in a transformation. Their hearts no longer beg, they choose with intention. And when someone finally enters that sacred space, they meet not desperation but presence. That's the quiet beauty of the individuation process, self-awareness blooming into deeper connection. And when two people meet from fullness, well, listening itself becomes deeper, almost soulful, opening the door to the next layer of presence. Spiritually awake people don't listen to respond, they listen to understand. They bring inner stillness to every conversation, almost as if the unconscious mind is translating what's left unsaid. Their attention becomes a sanctuary where another person's heart can breathe. They notice tone, pauses, wounds hiding behind casual stories. Jungian psychology teaches that true presence unveils not just words, but symbols and meaning, signals of the human psyche longing to be seen. When someone opens their heart, these individuals don't rush to fix. They simply stay, allowing consciousness to unfold naturally. Their love slows life down. They don't push or demand, they witness. Presence becomes affection. A lingering gaze, a quiet silence, a subtle nod. These are their love languages. When they sit with someone, time feels different, like a calm river moving without hurry. Their stillness invites shadow work without force, helping the other person recognize their own light and darkness safely. Sometimes, they'll sit on a balcony or walk slowly through a park, saying little, just listening with the soul. It's inner alchemy disguised as simplicity. No fireworks, just honesty. There's a moment in the movie Good Will Hunting that perfectly captures this. Sean, Robin Williams, sits with Will, Matt Damon, on a bench at the Boston Public Garden. Sean doesn't try to win, argue, or correct. He simply reflects Will back to himself. His presence is firm but compassionate. No rush, no ego. He listens, then speaks with such depth psychology that Will's shadow feels seen, not attacked. That bench becomes a sacred space, where empathy meets truth. Sean doesn't fill the silence, he honors it. That's the kind of empathetic resonance spiritually awake people embody, presence that heals without touching. Spiritually awake people also recognize layers. They can sense when someone says, "I'm fine," but grief lives behind the eyes. They listen like someone decoding Jungian dream symbols, noticing emotional awareness, feeling the collective unconscious moving through the story. They understand projection and perception, so instead of reacting, they remain curious, inviting deeper truth. If a friend shares heartbreak, they don't rush to offer solutions. They sit with them, maybe make tea, maybe go for a slow walk, letting the soul speak in its own time. In love, presence matters more than advice. And as bonds grow, they perceive the human psyche in subtle textures, shadow and light, wounds and wisdom, the hero's journey beneath ordinary words. They know the power of the mind is revealed in silence as much as speech. In a world that urges quick replies, spiritually awake people choose slowness. They understand that possessing someone is never love, only seeing them is. Their presence becomes a mirror, reflecting the other's self with tenderness. And when they love like this, something shifts. Connection becomes a doorway, leading to an even deeper truth waiting to be discovered. For spiritually awake people, freedom over possession isn't just a principle, it's how they breathe inside a relationship. They understand that love isn't meant to be a cage but a wind that chooses to stay. The individuation process teaches them that every soul is on its own journey through the unconscious mind toward wholeness. In Jungian psychology, the impulse to possess comes from the shadow, the part terrified of abandonment. But when that shadow is integrated through self-awareness, emotional alchemy begins. Instead of demanding love, they honor it as shared consciousness, a meeting of two free beings walking side by side. To them, letting someone be themselves is the purest form of devotion. They've seen how the wounded healer archetype can cling out of fear, trying to fix or manage the other. But spiritually awake individuals choose presence, not possession. They know the power of the mind shapes relationships. The calmer the inner stillness, the clearer the perception. If a partner wants to travel, explore new friendships, or spend time alone, they support it, because inner transformation requires space. They trust that love rooted in freedom doesn't weaken, it expands, evolves, breathes. Many recall relationships where attachment felt like trying to hold water. The tighter the grip, the faster it escaped. Through shadow work and healing the inner child, they discovered the fear wasn't of losing the other, but of losing themselves. So they softened. They stopped making another person their identity. They shifted from "your mind" to "I'm grateful to walk with you." That subtle change is inner alchemy, turning fear into reverence. The collective unconscious whispers the same truth. Love must allow movement, even when movement feels risky. In everyday life, freedom over possession looks surprisingly simple. No monitoring, no emotional bargaining, no holding people hostage when they need space. These individuals trust the hero's journey unfolding inside the other person, just as they trust their own. They follow symbols and meaning as they appear. Synchronicities explained not by chance but by depth psychology. If their partner wants solitude, time with friends, a new hobby, or a deep dive into Jungian dream symbols, they honor that. They might even recommend books like The Untethered Soul or Women Who Run with the Wolves, anything that strengthens the inner voice of the self. Their love whispers, "I choose you, but I don't need to control you." There's both light and darkness inside that truth, because real freedom invites vulnerability. Yet spiritually awake people would rather face honest uncertainty than live numb inside false security. They believe what's aligned will stay, what leaves is a teacher. And when love grows spacious enough for two souls to breathe freely, something unexpected happens. Compassion begins to deepen, not because love becomes safer, but because it becomes sacred. Have you ever wondered what it truly means to love someone not only in their light, but also in their darkness? Spiritually awake people know that loving the parts someone proudly shows is easy, but the soul asks for something deeper. They understand that every human carries a shadow, the unspoken wounds, the unmet needs, the parts of the unconscious mind we've been taught to hide. Carl Jung reminds us that the individuation process can't move forward until these hidden fragments are brought into awareness. So, when a loved one reveals their darkness, their fears, their insecurities, their emotional rawness, these individuals don't run. They soften. They lean in. Because they know inner transformation often begins where shame once tried to bury us. They've learned that every emotional reaction carries a secret story. When someone becomes quiet, avoids eye contact, or gets defensive over something small, spiritually awake people don't jump to judgment. They understand the emotional alchemy happening beneath the surface. Echoes from childhood, protective patterns born from survival, the inner child quietly asking, "Am I safe here?" Instead of trying to erase the discomfort, they offer presence, an unhurried gaze, a warm silence, compassionate body language. They've studied how projection and perception distort love, how the unconscious mind can make a partner look like an enemy when the real battle is internal. So, they listen for symbols and meaning hidden between the lines, sensing where the shadow might be speaking. Love becomes less about avoiding imperfection and more about embracing the human psyche in its full, messy truth. This compassion is not naive, it's self-aware. Spiritually awake individuals have met their own shadow, jealousy disguised as concern, insecurity masquerading as control, fear pretending to be anger. They know how powerful the unconscious mind can be, guiding dreams, sabotaging relationships, shaping destiny unseen. After walking their own hero's journey through shadow work, emotional alchemy, and healing the inner child, they approach others with humility. Instead of saying, "Why are you like this?" they ask, "What part of you is hurting?" or "What memory is being touched here?" These questions have the same quality as Jungian dream interpretation, opening a symbolic doorway where the inner voice of the self can speak. Their compassion is a mirror reflecting the other person's innate worth, even when they can't see it themselves. In day-to-day life, compassion toward the shadow looks deceptively simple. It might be taking a slow walk when emotions run high. It might look like stopping an argument midway to breathe and reconnect. Like sitting on the floor together, backs touching, in quiet presence. Or offering grounding practices, journaling, breathwork, mindful silence, dream interpretation sessions, to help decode what the psyche is trying to express. Maybe they gently recommend a book like The Places That Scare You, Pema Chodron, or guide the person into depth psychology reflections. Sometimes it's a quiet, late-night conversation where two people share wounds under soft light, speaking with honesty instead of blame. They know the shadow in relationships isn't a threat, it's an invitation. An invitation into a deeper layer of love where light and darkness collaborate to create emotional alchemy. This way of loving builds a different kind of intimacy. An intimacy that's not rooted in fantasy or perfection, but in truth and transparency. Over time, two people begin to see beyond the persona, that carefully groomed image, and witness each other's full humanity. They love through the interruptions, the relapses, the slow healing. They understand that every wound carries wisdom, a message from the collective unconscious waiting to be heard. And sometimes, this wisdom arrives in surprising forms. A recurring dream, a synchronicity explained by inner work, or a moment of sudden self-awareness where the shadowed story finally makes sense. When the psyche feels safe enough to reveal its layers, love becomes a sacred mirror, reflecting not only who we are, but who we are becoming. They also know that compassion toward the shadow doesn't mean tolerating harm. Healthy boundaries are an essential part of Jung and modern psychology. Spiritually awake people differentiate between someone revealing their wounds and someone refusing to take responsibility for them. Compassion is not enabling, it's seeing the potential for growth, but honoring one's own inner voice of the self. They understand that sometimes the most loving act is stepping back, letting the other person face their unintegrated shadow so they can pursue their own individuation process. Love isn't about rescuing, it's about walking alongside, honoring autonomy and truth. And as this compassion grows, relationships begin to feel like sacred containers where both partners can evolve. Emotional awareness replaces blame. Silence becomes a healing force. Symbols and meaning emerge naturally. The power of the mind reveals that each conflict can be a doorway, each wound a lesson, each moment of fear a chance for shadow integration. And when two souls learn to hold each other this way, patiently, bravely, honestly, love expands beyond personal desire into something that feels like a spiritual path. A love so away, it naturally begins moving toward the sacred, beyond the limits of romance itself. Loving, for spiritually awake people, is like stepping into a hidden temple where the walls are woven with silence, and every heartbeat echoes with ancient memory. They don't treat connection as a predictable story with flowers and fireworks. They recognize it as a sacred field of consciousness, a subtle meeting place where two inner worlds bow to each other. Romance may plant the first seed, but what nurtures the bond is the way souls transform when they truly see one another. Carl Jung once suggested that when two psyches meet authentically, both are changed, and these individuals take that truth seriously. Love becomes less about wanting and more about witnessing, less about holding and more about honoring. It is inner alchemy turned into relationship. To them, this kind of love becomes a place where the meaning of life briefly removes its veil. Sometimes it reveals itself in simple rituals, two people breathing softly together as morning sun creeps through the window, sharing interpretations of dreams as though deciphering secret messages from the collective unconscious. Other days, It unfolds in small but radiant synchronicities explained not through chance, but through presence. A song appearing at the exact moment a question arises, an animal crossing their path with symbolic precision. They pay attention to symbols and meaning because they understand that the unconscious mind is always speaking, especially when love is near. In this space, the power of the mind becomes shared territory, and consciousness feels like a dance. Spiritually awake people know that every love story is really a hero's journey disguised as two bodies sitting side by side. They honor their partner's light and darkness with equal reverence. They aren't startled when the shadow in relationships rises. Instead, they slow down, breathing into inner stillness. If the inner child trembles with old fears, they listen rather than correct. They understand that projection and perception will show up, sometimes distorting truth. Yet instead of reacting, they get curious. Where is this coming from? What memory is being touched here? They treat emotional alchemy as a daily practice, transforming fear into deeper connection, discomfort into revelation. Their love never demands, "Become who I want." Instead, it whispers, "Become who you are," with infinite respect. This sacred approach shows itself in both ordinary and breathtaking gestures. Preparing dinner becomes meditation. Arranging the table becomes ritual. Conflict becomes a doorway rather than a wall. They might light candles before discussing dreams, seeing it as an invitation for the unconscious mind to speak. They study depth psychology together, explore Jung and modern psychology not as intellectual hobbies, but as languages through which the soul speaks. Sometimes they laugh about their persona and shadow over dessert, finding freedom in recognizing that everyone is beautifully unfinished. In silence, their bodies speak, a hand resting on a chest, two heads leaning together, a shared breath after tears. Love, here, is made of presence rather than performance. As their bond deepens, they begin noticing how individuation becomes a shared pilgrimage, not merging into one identity, but walking side by side while becoming more fully themselves. Their relationship becomes a vessel where the inner voice of the self is welcomed. Archetypes in everyday life begin to visit. The wounded healer appears during illness or confession. The sage shows up in long, intimate conversations beneath dim lights. The lover expresses itself not only through touch but through attention and inner stillness. They notice light and darkness weaving through the mundane. A disagreement becomes an initiation. An apology becomes rebirth. Dreams sometimes synchronize mysteriously. Symbols point to what words cannot touch. In this sacred framework, love doesn't shrink, it expands. It doesn't collapse into possession, it rises into freedom. These individuals understand that love is not a contract, it is a calling. It asks them to look beyond the persona and recognize the self beneath. Sometimes this means holding their partner through grief. Sometimes it means standing still while the other searches inward. Other times, it means letting go temporarily so both can return with clearer sight. Love here understands the inner transformation required to grow. It trusts that what is true will remain, not because it is forced, but because it is aligned. And when they think they've reached the deepest inner chamber of the relationship, a new door appears, subtle, luminous, inviting them further. Perhaps it opens through a shared moment of silence, or in a dream, or through a sudden burst of emotional awareness. The journey seems endless, but never exhausting, because it isn't about arrival, but unfolding. This is love as sacred, beyond romance, beyond fantasy, beyond ego. A way of loving where two souls evolve in rhythm with something greater than themselves. A way of loving that feels less like a destination, and more like spiritual awakening shared. So before we close, here's a quick reminder of how spiritually awake people love differently. They begin with inner awareness, loving from fullness, not emptiness. They practice deep presence, listening with the soul, not the ego. They choose freedom over possession, allowing love to breathe instead of control. They offer compassion toward the shadow, welcoming the wounds instead of judging them. And finally, they treat love as sacred, beyond romance, as a path of inner transformation. Now, which one spoke to you the most? Where do you feel called to grow? Self-awareness, presence, freedom, compassion, or sacred connection? Your answer might reveal exactly where your unconscious is guiding you next. If this message stirred something in you, take the next step. Invite this awareness into your everyday life. And of course, if you want to keep exploring Jungian psychology, shadow work, emotional alchemy, and how to build relationships rooted in consciousness, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.